Number 1.
So this happened a while back. When I was in my early 20s, I was working at a little retail store in my town's mall. It was coming up to the end half of the day, and I don't know how I noticed it, but an older man, probably 50s, I'm not sure, had walked past my store about 3 or 4 times. Not consecutively, just every now and again. Now, I worked in one of those little costume jewelry stores, so it was odd for an older male to be walking past so many times, but I kind of didn't think anything of it. I don't even know how I picked up on it in the first place. It came closing time, and I had to catch my bus home at about 6:30 p.m. I remember it was transitioning into winter because it was dark out by then. I'm a very paranoid person. I still live by the stranger danger rules. So even now, when I leave work, I make sure I change into an outfit less fashionable. I don't like drawing attention to myself in any way possible, so I try and make sure I'm as covered up and average looking as I can be. I don't know why, but I have that disease where I attract all the wrong attention for no reason at all. So as I said, I was waiting for my bus home, sitting by myself at the town's center bus terminal. And guess who walks past? The older man. At this point, I kind of felt a little uneasy, but in my head, I tried to make reason prevail, as many people take buses all the damn time. My bus showed up and I got on, and well, you can all guess who got on after me. I remember sitting in the seats facing inward, the ones for wheelchairs and prams, and he sat at the first seat above the steps. I remember staring forward and feeling his eyes burning into me. I kept trying to use my peripheral vision to see if he was looking at me, but not wanting him to know I noticed him. The whole bus ride, I waited to see if he got off before my stop, thinking it was just my over-anxious, paranoid mind working overtime, until I pressed the button for my stop. I waited until the last possible second to press it, and as I stood up, he did too. I went to walk to the front door of the bus, and he exited the rear. At that moment, as soon as he stepped off, I sat back down again. I had no idea where the bus went after my stop, but honestly, I didn't care. I will never forget the look on his face as the bus drove off. I have never seen such hate and anger in someone's face than I did through that window. His face is burnt into my memory like a photograph. It still absolutely terrifies me to this day. I have no idea what would have happened to me if I got off the bus at my stop that night, but I'm glad my paranoia was so intense I didn't.
Number 2.
Ever since I met the creepy truck driver, I watch what I wear in my neighborhood and around the area of my neighborhood. This happened a few months ago in March of 2016. This is very clear and recent. One day in March, I left my house because I needed to take the bus in order to get to my classes. I'm in college. I didn't like what I was wearing, and I already walked up a big hill in my neighborhood and almost about out of it. I decided to call my boyfriend and ask him to bring a pair of sweatpants because I felt uneasy with my outfit and it gave off a bad feeling. Within 5 minutes of hanging up the phone with my boyfriend, a white truck drives slowly behind me. When I turned around to see who it was, the driver drove slowly next to me. This is how the conversation went with the creepy truck driver.
Hello, you look very gorgeous, and I just wanted to let you know. Do you need a ride?
Considering I didn't like what I was wearing, this made me feel like a prostitute, but I politely declined, stating that I have a ride.
Are you sure? Because you look cold.
I politely declined again, stating it was all right and I will be fine. After the second try, he gave up, or so I thought. I immediately called my boyfriend and told him to stay on the phone with me until I at least got on the bus. When I turned the corner to walk down a street to get to the bus stop, I saw garden workers, and in front of their truck was the creepy truck driver parked waiting for me. When I got close enough to his truck, once again, he asked me if he could give me a ride, using the same excuse about it being cold outside. I politely declined for the third time. Once I got on the bus, I hung up the phone with my boyfriend and I called my best friend. As I was explaining what happened, I noticed the creepy truck driver following the bus. He followed the bus for about 15 minutes until the bus broke down and police came onto the bus for a different reason. A second bus came, so I ended up making it safe to school. A week after the creepy truck driver tried getting me into his car, my parents went to see a show and my brother was working, so I was home alone with my dog. An hour after my parents left, I heard my dog going crazy, the doorbell ringing non-stop and lots of knocking. I looked out the window and it's the stupid truck driver. He didn't see me though because I peeped through the blinds. By the time I called neighborhood patrol, he was gone, but they watched my house for a few days. I was thinking that was the last straw because nothing happened for a good few months. Now it's May of 2016, and I was with my best friend walking to Taco Bell. We noticed a red truck driving very slowly. I looked at the driver, and guess who? It's the stupid, creepy truck driver, and he just smiled and waved in his new truck. I don't know how Mr. Creepy Truck Driver knew where I lived or knew which way I took to the bus, which gives me the chills. I have a feeling things aren't over with Mr. Creepy Truck Driver.
Number 3.
As usual, there's a little backstory here. When this happened, I was 20. I'm female, and I should also point out that I am short and am often confused for being a lot younger than I am. Even at 20, I was often mistaken for being 16. I was in Paris for the summer. I had organized to go on a walking tour, a ghosts and dark history tour, ironically. The tour didn't start until late at night. I'm always early to nearly everything, and this wasn't an exception. I had over an hour to wait, so I went for a walk along the Seine, and by the time I walked back to the meeting point, Pont Neuf, it was dark. Again, keeping myself busy until the tour started, I walked the bridge, admired the many locks that adorn it. It was then that I noticed him. When I looked up, he was looking at me. Noticing that I had caught him staring, his gaze drops and he shuffles along, seemingly doing the same thing as me, admiring the locks. Two things immediately caught my attention. He wasn't a tourist. He wore a very dirty vest with a workman's high visibility vest over the top. Its brightness factor lessened by the fact that it too was covered in dirt and grime stains. I had noticed him hanging around over 15 minutes ago. Where most people, mostly couples, continue walking the bridge, he was lingering. I ignored him, convinced it was nothing but a weirdo who was harmless. I sat down on one of the benches, taking in the lights of the city. It was less than a minute before he sat down beside me. He smelled awful. I had to look in the other direction.
Where are you from?
He asks. There was no way I'd give him any information about myself. My alarm bells were ringing. I say nothing and pretend to be overly interested in my phone, which did not work in France and was therefore only there for show.
I think you're alone.
He says. No, I tell him. I'm waiting for someone. I turn my back to my phone.
Have a coffee with me.
The way he asks makes it sound like a demand, not a question. No, I say again. I'm waiting for someone. He falls silent. Not for long, however.
It's cold here. Have a coffee with me,
he says again. By this point, I'd had enough. I'm not a rude person, and I avoid conflict, but he was not going to be leaving anytime soon. If you're so cold, why don't you go home, I snap. He falls silent. It's at this point I reflect on what he's been saying and realize that he's been purposefully making mistakes while speaking English. Not the mistakes a Frenchman would say. I speak French and have many French friends. I know the mistakes they tend to make. This man was a native English speaker who was pretending not to be.
I think that you're alone.
Once again, I tell him that I'm not. He's staring at me intently.
I don't think you're waiting for anyone.
I get up, tell him that that was exactly what I was doing, and I leave. I walk a little ways, unsure as to what to do. He follows me. I keep walking, heading for the nearest couple over the other side of the bridge. I'm aware of him not far behind. I reach the couple, my heart jumping in my chest. Pouvez-vous rester avec moi? Il y a un homme qui me suit. Will you stay with me? There's a man following me. The French couple stare at me in surprise and agree, asking if I was okay. I look behind me to see where he was. He'd disappeared. To be gone that fast, he'd had to have ran.
Number 4.
It was 2012, and my best friend Hannah had convinced me to join her on a weekend trip up north. She had, after searching for the longest time, found her dream car and was planning on traveling the 900 kilometers to the very north of Sweden to buy it. It was a second-hand two-door Suzuki Vitara in a purplish kind of color, and I must admit I didn't share her obsession with it. But with her being the closest thing to a sister that I will ever get, I was happy to join her nonetheless. Hannah and I have always had each other, from the cradle and onwards. Sharing each other's love for adventure, we have traveled the world together. At the time this happened, we were both 21 and had recently returned from a trip in Asia. The man who was selling her the car had agreed to meet us at the small airport in Umeå. When we arrived shortly before lunchtime, it had started to snow heavily. The first snow of the season, no less. The parking lot was almost empty, and when I saw the man standing outside the Vitara, I felt immediately concerned. He was dressed like a hunter. A lot of people in this area of the country live a lifestyle with hunting and fishing, so nothing strange with that really. But still, there was something about him that made me uneasy. He was nice, though, smiling and waving to us, shaking hands with us both before walking us around the car and pointing out all the tiny little flaws. He showed us the work he had done on the car and showed the paperwork from the recently done engine repairs. He made the impression that he didn't want to hide anything. On the contrary, he made a show out of being very forthcoming and honest. The snowing had now intensified, and we were getting cold. He opened the car door for us and said,
"I got the paperwork at home. Let's close the deal over some coffee."
Against all my instincts, I climbed in after Hannah, both of us now trapped in the back seat. I had no reason to feel threatened by this man who had been nothing but pleasant to us, other than the alarm bells going off inside my head. I can't tell what it was that made me feel that way, but there must have been some sign that something was wrong, something that my subconscious tuned into. The man was constantly talking. Funny, since people from the north of Scandinavia are famous for never speaking a word more than absolutely necessary. He showed the stereo, told us about the features of the car, about the places we drove past, about the wildlife and the nature. There was not a silent moment. After about 20 minutes, I started to notice that we were in no way moving in the direction of civilization. Instead, it seemed we were driving further and further into the vast wilderness. It struck me that he had us in the back of a 2-door car, driving us into unknown territory, and no one knew where we were. I looked at Hannah, who was happily listening to the man telling stories about the area, and I noticed she didn't look at all worried. Maybe I was totally overreacting. We drove past a group of people standing by the side of the road, hunters planning their day or taking a break maybe. This truly is a very different Sweden compared to the city. The car finally stopped outside a small wooden cottage with no neighboring houses, apart from a small cabin that we drove past a few hundred meters down the road, but it had looked empty. We followed the man inside. He was still talking non-stop and continued to do so until the moment the door closed behind us. Hannah kept asking things about the car, and I could sense that her voice had a new undertone now, a thin, sharp tenseness that made me wonder if she too had started to feel that something wasn't right.
I'll put the kettle on,
He said, and as he passed us to go into the kitchen, he let his hand touch Hannah's hair, and he smiled smugly. "May I use the bathroom?" I asked politely, and made my way to the door with the little red heart on it. I was washing my hands when I saw something in the stained bathroom mirror, something that was hidden behind the water cistern. I pulled out a rolled-up plastic folder, and as I turned the pages, I felt my blood run cold. It was very violent porn pictures that looked like they had been cut out from magazines, and they were glued to the paper, surrounded by cut-out pieces of handwritten text. Put together, it made a horrifying story about how a woman was lured into a car with the promise of getting to buy the car cheaply, and then it quickly turned into a horror story. I know this will sound silly, but when we traveled together, Hannah and I had a code word for whenever we felt it was time to get out of a situation. We had never needed to use it, just joked about it, but now it came in handy. I walked out of the bathroom and looked at Hannah and said, "Potatoes. We forgot to buy potatoes. And that's too bad, because good God, do we need some?" The look on my face must have told her that the situation was no joke, and she said,
"Oh, should we get some as soon as possible?"
Hannah, always pretty and charming and capable of great acting, casually walked over to the man in the kitchen, tapped his shoulder, and said,
"Excuse me, but I was wondering if I could have a quick look at the cam belt."
He huffed something about it being in good shape and handed over the keys. We got into the car and sped off faster than the weather strictly speaking allowed. We left the car at the airport and hoped we hadn't made a terrible mistake. What if he reported it stolen? It would be embarrassing to explain to the police. But nothing happened. He didn't follow us, didn't report it. We had to take the train since we had no plane tickets. The original plan had been to take the car home, and we didn't want to linger close to the airport in case he came looking for us. Later, Hannah asked what made me use the code word, and I told her about what I had found. It might just have been a fantasy, a sick game, and maybe he would never have done anything to us. But right then and there, I was convinced we would die if we didn't get out. Thank God Hannah didn't need any convincing or proof, just the code word. I truly think that if we hadn't talked about it so many times before, about how we would handle a situation where we need to get out fast, things would have ended differently. Both of us knew that if either ever used the code word, it's time to get out. No questions asked. Just move. Creepy Mina here of the Worst Nightmare channel. I hope you enjoyed those 4 stories of women encountering more creepers. Some really good ideas came out of these stories, such as not getting off the bus and pretending you were getting off the bus, and the code word, And of course, the lady from Paris asking the couple for help. That was an excellent idea. Well, I apologize I did not get this out on Wednesday as I hoped I would. I'm going to have to stick with my Saturday schedule for now anyway. So, you know the drill. Comment below. Tell us if you have any tips, if you ever used any tricks that saved you in a sticky situation. Give this video a thumbs up. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Share on your favorite social networking platform. Follow me on Twitter as WorstNightmare6 for advance notice of all uploaded videos. And please do remember to stay safe.